So let's the other side. And help me here, Stuart, you are the most experienced. As we mentioned, we try to, when evolve technologies today, we are more concerned about infrastructure as a code and programmability, DevNet, and so on. So why would somebody go after evolving technologies, and what are the value it will bring?
Hey, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So why would you go after evolving technologies? For me personally, I started to see a shift in the industry a number of years ago. Well, let's remember that automation, within networking, it's not new. There's folks who've been doing it for a very, very long time. Even in the very early days of my career, there was people doing Perl and Bash scripts to automate all of their networks. So this isn't a new, it's not a new thing. It's not just come out of the middle of nowhere. And it's not a phase either. We've seen, huge trajectories, huge momentum since releasing the DevNet certifications. I think, when you look statistically, over something like 6,000 people have taken a DevNet certification since February. I think the numbers are stacking up now. And this is what we're, seeing as a whole of how people are expanding their knowledge into programmability on top of networking engineering skills. And that to me doesn't mean that all network engineers have to become software engineers. Far from that. That's not what I'm saying. When people ask me how I think about this, the way that I think about this is I learned programmability, I learned network automation to make my job easier, to make my life easier. That was the main thing. It was one of those things to automate away the boring things. That was the first thing. Because nobody wants to be that engineer on a Friday night going around 300 devices doing a show version and copying it into an Excel sheet. You can do that with automation. And once you've started working through those kind of use cases, you can start to build the impact in for the business, and the business can see a tremendous amount of impact in there from doing that. So you're taking, an engineering team away from doing, what might be considered the laborious tasks and all of those things, and utilizing their skills everywhere, because a network manager who's running a team doesn't want 3 or 4 members of their team doing this toil. And this is where automation and programmability can come in, and we can start to build scripts and share those with the other people within in our organization. So the value becomes in there of the whole time saving across, the things. Then the other factor that comes into it as well is the human element of mistakes. Now, I'll be the first person to hold my hand up and say that I've made a mistake on a network device. And I'll be the first person to hold my hand up and say, yes, I've caused an outage. And I will also be the first to say, I've caused an outage at scale. Am I proud of all these things? Absolutely not. But it does happen. I can't avoid that. Errors do happen within, configuration. Everybody will make mistakes. It's, I think somewhere there they say that 80 to 90% of outages are caused by, human input and error. And by doing automation, what I learned at automation is that I could deploy at scale and also minimize that risk. But that doesn't go to say as well, on the other side of that coin, that there isn't any risk with automation. I've also said in the past is that you don't want to be that person that say, to your manager, to your boss, to your company, I took down the network. That's the bad news. The good news is I did it with automation. No one wants to be that person either. So, as a counter to coin what they said on Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. But this is why we have things like peer reviews. This is why we have a CI/CD process in there. This is why we build now validation into these things, which becomes part of the evolving technologies. So you've learned to write the code. You can get information. Now you want to make changes. But while you're making those changes, also invest into doing all of the validation that comes along with this as well. And being that person to say, my code has been validated. So you have the highest degree of confidence that these evolving technologies that you're using today, whether you're doing this from a controller or whether you're doing it through open source, like, Python scripts using, like a Scrapy or PyATS, NAPAR, NetMiko, etc. Or you're doing this via a controller like NSO or SD-WAN, DNA Center, this goes on. Whether you're doing that, your rate of success is going to be so much higher.
Can I just pitch in? Can I just pitch in a second? Because I think you've just touched on something that's really important there, Stuart. That automation in itself is really just doing the same things we always did, but quicker and at bigger scale, right? But what you've just touched on there is the key point, I think, to the DevNet approach. What it's about is not just doing things quicker and faster and bigger, but wrapping all the stuff around it that means that you're actually improving the quality of the process. So all of that validation, all of that testing and stuff that you're building into the approach, that's the thing that makes the difference. Sorry, guys. I just really wanted to make that point.
That very valid point that actually linked to my question that automation is just a tool, but looking for like framework, like the orchestration, the CCDE, how to make sure that's integration, development, maybe controlling with GitLab. Yeah, I believe it's like infrastructure as a code, treating the network like a small program, and how to make like the DevOps promise that you have to do maybe hundreds of changes to the network on one day. This is also for us, as an engineer, we are hoping to see something like that. But my follow-up, Stuart, if you, for a network engineer like myself, which been, and Daren, which been in the industry for more than 20 years, we've been more like cable guys, to go and work the evolving technology. This involves many branches. You need to work on, you need to understand maybe something like GitLab. You need to have a bit of SDN, have a bit of automation like Python. So how to balance between all technologies, and it would be easy.
And it's when if you're imagining yourself stood at the bottom of the mountain of this, looking up towards the summit, it's very daunting. And it is a common question of what should I learn first, and then what should I learn next? And then you come to this kind of crossroads, and do you go down, this road with, say Circle CI or GitHub Actions, or do you go down the Jenkins route? And when you start to look into all of the tools, and sometimes, if you're doing this for yourself and you're investigating those tools, pick which ones, sound seem cool to you. If there's a whole business strategy involved in this, if you're doing some kind of assessment of which CI/CD pipeline comes into it, that's a whole different, another question. There's a whole different series that comes in there with all of the support. But you're absolutely right. You're looking at this, and it's a whole different world to come into from network engineering, to step into the developer world and see all of the tools that they're running, and finding out in the developer ecosystem what these tools are, where they sit. And to me, it's like putting together like a jigsaw puzzle, finding out where all these pieces sit and then just gluing them together. There's no need to feel overwhelmed, because I can assure you that there's probably only 1% of people out there who actually know all of the tools, and it might even be less than 1%. I'm sure Daren knows every one of them by the back of his hand. So he knows all of them. I certainly don't know. I don't know all of them. People are. It's funny. I was following a chat before we jumped into the call, and someone said, "What's your experience with Grumpy?" I was like, "I've never heard of this." So all of a sudden, I'm looking at it thinking, "Hey, this is cool. How can I bring this into my workflows? Is it going to serve me any value?" And that's the question. Is it going to bring you any value? That's the question.
Again, I'm sorry, I've got to dive in here just a second, because this is the conversation we were having immediately before the call about the DevNet Associate exam and what that brings. And everything that Stuart just said is what the DevNet Associate is about. It's about understanding what it means to build that kind of ecosystem, and why you would do it, and what the approach is. It's not about saying, use this tool, use that tool, use that tool. Okay. It's about being able to understand what those tools bring to the process. You have to go and find out what those tools are yourself, and you have to assess whether or not that's the right tool for you or not. And there's echoes of the CCDE in that whole thing, because it's about being able to weigh up the right tool for the right job. But the point is, those processes are all there. The processes are all there. And I just waved this book, right? Genius. But the point is, it's all the whole mindset of the DevNet Associate is encapsulated in something like that, where you go through the process, you understand, you get into the brains of the people who understand this stuff, and you take that mindset on board. And it's the same. The same goes for the DE. Absolutely, completely. This is probably the closest thing I found to doing the DE in terms of process. And I will.
Let me put a question to you then, Darren. Sorry, I just want to ask a question.
No, please.
In that instance where you're saying about the right tools, could you in some way liken that into the way that this, I've never taken the CCDE, so excuse me, this is a very naive question. Could you liken that for the right tool for the job? Could you distinguish that to be similar to, say, a challenge that you're facing on the CCDE where you are asked to choose, say, for example, a routing protocol or how you would manipulate routes in there, say how you would manipulate BGP traffic or OSPF traffic, because there's certain parameters and they're not tools per se,
but technologies.
How you make those decisions and those technologies, is that something that you feel is similar?
Definitely. So this is the one thing that really jumped out. Yes, there was all this new stuff that I didn't understand, CICD and containers and all of that good stuff. And I had to go learn that and understand that. But when I was looking at things like how to use APIs and for which types of controllers use which type of APIs and what functionality there is in those APIs and all that sort of good stuff, it struck me then that it's a very similar approach to so in the DE, what they teach is if you follow it quite strictly, what you learn to do is to be able to assemble tables of comparative tables for different types of technologies. So you say this VPN technology gives you this capability, but you faced with this constraint and this constraint, right? And you build up this view of the different technologies and the similarities and the differences between them all.
Yeah.
Well, when I was doing the study for the DevNet Associate, I was having to do the same thing with the technologies that were presented in the DevNet Associate. So things like understanding how APIs drive different controllers and how you assemble those API requests and what the capabilities are of the different platforms. And I found that really similar, that it's about understanding why it is you want to do the thing you're trying to do and then assessing which technologies map into that capability. Right. Yeah. And so that's why I draw the parallel, because I think from a testing experience perspective, I think that the DevNet Associate is probably the closest thing I've seen to a CCDE written exam. Yeah, they're in terms of the way they were built out, which is another reason why people find it tough, because the point with the DE is if you've got loads of experience, then you're in a so much better place because your mindset is already about reasoning. It's about being able to compare and contrast, right? It's all
analytical skill.